Today I have a presentation on the 2021 adaptation of West Side Story, which I have to do for class, so I thought, why not share it here? So for those of you who are subscribed for vastly different reasons, I hope you enjoy this anyway. Let's hop straight into it. What is West Side Story? Well, for those of you who don't know, West Side Story is a musical adaptation of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, conceived by director and dancer Jerome Robbins, and with music by Leonard Bernstein and lyrics by Stephen Sondheim. I think it's best described by comparing it to Shakespeare's original play, which I'll just assume you have a basic understanding of for simplicity's sake. I will go over some of the details, however, just so we can compare these two stories properly. Romeo and Juliet takes place in Verona, where we follow two rival noble families, the Montagues and Capulets, whose kin, Romeo and Juliet respectively, fall in love at a Capulet ball, and eventually conspire to flee for the sake of their love due to two murders, Romeo's close friend Mercutio and Juliet's cousin Tybalt, who was killed in retaliation by Romeo for the former's murder. Eventually, Romeo and Juliet die at the end of the play. On the other hand, West Side Story takes place in Upper Manhattan in New York City, where there is a feud between two rival gangs, the white gang called the Jets and the Puerto Rican gang called the Sharks. Our two lovers, Tony and Maria, both have ties to each respective gang, and similarly fall in love at a high school dance. They eventually conspire to flee due to the murders of Riff, the leader of the Jets and Tony's best friend, and Bernardo, the leader of the Sharks, who Tony kills in retaliation for Riff's murder. Eventually, Tony is killed, but notably Maria survives to the end. We'll get into some of the nuances of these differences later. So what about the movie? Well, the movie is directed by Steven Spielberg and is based on the original 1961 film, which is based on the 1957 stage musical. Spielberg chose to take on this particular musical because, as he put it himself in an interview with ScreenRant, "I was 10 years old when I first listened to the West Side Story album, and it never went away. I've been able to fulfill that dream and keep that promise that I made to myself. Divisions between unlike-minded people are as old as time itself, and the divisions between the Sharks and the Jets in 1957, which inspired the musical, were profound, but not as divided as we find ourselves today. It turned out, in the middle of the development of the scripts, things widened, which I think in a sense, sadly, made the story of these radical divides, not just territorial divides, more relevant to today's audience than perhaps it even was in 1957. The film stars Ansel Elgort as Tony, Rachel Zegler as Maria, Mike Faist as Riff, Ariana DeBose as Anita, and Rita Moreno as Valentino, who is notably Anita in the original 1961 film. So why did I choose this film out of all the Romeo and Juliet adaptations out there? Well, both the movie and musical are special to me because it takes one of Shakespeare's greatest plays and evolves it into a tragedy involving themes of racism, xenophobia, and gang violence. Combine that with the music of Sondheim and Bernstein, and you have something truly special. Additionally, while the 1961 version of the film still holds up relatively well, there are some things that have not aged gracefully, such as brownface, and this film has a more diverse cast that strengthens the themes present in the original material. Let's delve a little deeper than that, though. Let's analyze what I consider to be one of the best scenes in the film and what makes it so special.
What do you do to get yourself locked up,
He
primo?
beat the snot out of someone exactly like you.
Don't matter what I did. I'm different now. And you don't gotta worry about me being with Maria.
So you told God and Jesus, when you get out, you're gonna become somebody new. Am I right, pendejito? And then you came to that dance, and you see my sister, and you think, how about I get myself a brown girl? I never spent time with a little Puerto Riqueña before. If I can be with a colored girl like her, I'll be somebody better than I was. Somebody I never been before. Pero con mi hermana, no.
He won't fight you. Fight someone who will.
We're entering this scene without some crucial context. Like Act 3, Scene 1 in Romeo and Juliet, we are seeing what will eventually become the big fight of the story. Like the fight in the original play between Montague and Capulet, a rumble between the Jets and Sharks is about to begin. Tony, like Romeo, is attempting to make peace with Bernardo, who is essentially this movie's version of Tybalt. Bernardo despises Tony and his love for his sister Maria, which, much like Tybalt, hates Romeo for his love for Juliet. He calls Tony a pendejo, which is the Spanish equivalent for stupid or asshole, not too dissimilar from when Tybalt says to Romeo, "Thou art a villain." Eventually, Riff, who acts as a sort of combination of the characters Benvolio and Mercutio, steps in and says, "He won't fight you. Fight somebody who will." Much like when Mercutio says to Tybalt, Tybalt, you rat catcher, will you walk? That's where the similarities largely end. I want to pay special attention to some of the things Bernardo says to Tony in this scene whilst attempting to get him to fight. During the confrontation, Bernardo says, "You see my sister and you think, how about I get myself a brown girl? If I can be with a colored girl like her, I'll be somebody better than I was, somebody I've never been before." This line has two implications that I think add a lot of nuances to the original story. One, Bernardo feels like Tony is using his sister as a prop to make up for some of the racist misdoings of his past. And two, there is a racial loathing stemming from the character that adds a depth to his rage that we don't see in the original play. This also reflects Spielberg's original vision for the film, in which he wanted to highlight racial and territorial divides that are still part of our culture today. We also see this racist rhetoric spew from the character Riff when he says lines such as, "He beat the snot out of someone exactly like you." With visceral hate such as this, the tragedy of Riff and Bernardo's murders are given a weight that is even more relevant to contemporary issues. Much like Riff and Bernardo, Tony's eventual death is fueled largely by the racial tension that is etched into the entire film. Unlike the play, in which Romeo poisons himself, Tony is killed by Chino, another shark. In my opinion, this gives his death a much more dramatic weight, largely due to it not being self-afflicted, although Tony does commit suicide in a sense, as he is deliberately looking for Chino upon hearing the false rumor that Maria is dead. Maria's survival also adds to the tragic themes, as unlike in Romeo and Juliet, only one of them is death-marked by their love, which can be seen as a spiritual separation of the characters. To conclude, West Side Story, specifically the 2021 version, is not just an elevated version of the classic tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, but the best version of that elevation due to its diverse casting and more contemporary themes. While I have immense respect for the source material, I don't think we will ever see a stronger version of this tale, at least not in my lifetime. But I would be more than just a little joyful if I am eventually proven wrong. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. If this video does well, I'd consider doing more videos in this format. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and if I got anything wrong, maybe wait a few days before mentioning it down below so my professor doesn't see and mark me down.